Hello, and welcome to the Openm Getting Started tutorial. This will be a three-part video series. This first one here will mostly talk about getting the server component installed. We like to call it Toems, the Open Endpoint Management Server. This will largely follow along with the documentation online for the Getting Started under Server Installation Toems Getting Started. We'll begin with the install Toems web applications. So I'm just going to use a couple VMs here. I've already got Server 2019 preloaded here, and I've already got the newest version of the Openm copied over here. First thing you're going to want to do is give yourself a static IP address. I've set up an internal adapter for my VMs to talk to each other. So I'll just do a private address here. And I won't be doing any routing, so it won't need any gateway. Now that that's set, we can begin the installation. It's pretty simple. Just open up the MSI. And for most things in here, you're just going to follow the defaults. Oh, looks like I have a reboot here that is pending that I have to do first. So let's reboot and we'll try again. All right, sorry for that little delay. Let's make the screen a little smaller here. Let's try running this again. There we go. Let's accept the agreement. We're just going to go through the basic installation. We're going to put every component onto the same server with this tutorial. But it can be broken up into three separate pieces. You can do the application on its own, the front end on its own, and the client communication server could be on its own. So we're just going to put all of these together. And we're also going to use the default MariaDB. You could use MySQL or your own instance of MariaDB or your own instance of MySQL. Again, we'll just put it all on the same server. This here, it's asking for a local storage location. This here is where you're going to keep all of your software that you might be deploying, or if you're going to be using the Openm for capturing images or deploying images, they would also get saved to this location. Right now, we'll just go with the default. You could change that somewhere if you would like. It's very easy to change later also. You will want to remember this location. We'll need to put this information into the web interface after installation is done. All right, I'll click Start. So if you're following along with the guide, we've completed step 1 and step 2 is running now. This should only take a few minutes. While this is installing, I'll talk about a few of the components that are being installed. Like I said earlier, there's actually 3 components to the software. There's a client comm server, which is used for all communication with the endpoints. So if you're pushing out software or collecting inventory or pushing out some scripts, the endpoints are only going to communicate with the client comm server. Same as if you're sending out an image or capturing an image, that is only going to communicate with the client comm server. It's just a nice way to keep everything separated from each other. In addition to that, there's the application server and front-end server. those two pieces are really how you manage the Openm. So you'll log into the front end, it'll talk to the API in the back end, and that's how you will set everything up. Other than that, there's not a whole lot to it. I mean, obviously you have your database and a few other pieces that are being installed. Hopefully this will be complete here in a couple minutes. And there we are. All right, moving on in the documentation, we are on the next step called configure the Openm. So now that that's installed, we should be able to access this from any web browser on the same network. Just put the IP in there. 100 we gave it. There we are. And the default username is Toems admin. Default password is also Toems admin. There we are. Looks like everything installed properly. The first thing we want to do is change the admin password. We need to do that, or some of the functionality actually won't work. It knows it hasn't been changed yet, and it just won't work properly. Let's change it to password for now. 8 characters, actions, and update. All right, that's step 2, if you're still following along in the guide. Step 3 is set organization name. We'll go down to admin settings, and then server, and then organization name. Now this is a requirement for the certificates that will be created later. This name here will show up in the certificate. Okay, moving on. Step 4, set the storage location. So we'll scroll down to storage location. You want to keep the storage type as local. So there is an SMB option. For the purpose of keeping things simple, we're sticking with everything on the same box for now. Now, storage path, this is where you're going to want to enter the same path that was used during installation. If you kept the default, you can just put that in there. If you changed it, put whatever you changed it to. All right, next, creating a comm server. So remember, the comm server is how the clients will communicate with the Openm. We need to define those comm servers. Once again, this comm server resides on this box. We will add a comm server here. We'll give it a name. I usually like to name it something that's relevant to where it's physically located. This one is on the Openm01. That's the name of this server up here. And I'll name it com1. The URL is going to be, it's going to use the IP address that you assigned earlier. It's http:// it's going to be port 888. So that would be the full URL of this comm server. So basically what that means is when a client is trying to communicate with the Openm, how will it do it? And it does it via this URL right here. You could also use a fully qualified domain name as long as you've got everything set up properly. HTTPS is also an option. We'll talk about that in a later tutorial. The storage path should already be populated. And we will add this server. There we go. It's created. Let's move on down to step 6. Set the default COM server cluster. So we'll go back to settings, client COM servers, and add COM server cluster. Now, a COM server cluster is basically what it sounds like. It's a collection of COM servers. We've only got one COM server in this instance, so that's the only one that's going to be part of the cluster. But you could have more COM servers set up throughout your network to help with load balancing, failover, things like that. We'll just name this main cluster. And you're going to want to turn on the default option. You need to have at least one default cluster. And now we want to check the COM servers that we want to put in this cluster. Again, there's only one COM server. We'll turn that one on. These are the different services this COM server can provide. So you can see that it's going to be an endpoint management server. That means that things like collecting inventory, pushing out software, things like that. It's also going to be an imaging server, a TFTP server, and a multicast server. All three of those just pertain specifically to imaging. There's also a role here we're going to leave active. That's if you have multiple COM servers. You could do an active-active, so the load is split up, or you could do an active-passive, whereas if one COM server fails, the other one won't get used until that first one fails. All right, we'll add this cluster. All right, moving on. Step, where are we at? 7. Now we need to set the provision key in the imaging token. Again, admin settings, security. We're going to go to actions, and we're going to generate the provision key. Go to actions again, and this time we're going to generate the imaging token. You should see that this is now populated, and this is now populated. We'll select actions and update security settings. Next, we will generate the certificates. So far, everything we've done needs to be done in this order, or else this step here will fail. When you go to actions, generate certificates, it uses a lot of the information we just put in to generate certificate authority and intermediate, which will be used later on to keep everything secure when communicating with your endpoints. All right, here, continuing on with the guide. Step 9, set up SMTP server. We're not going to do that for this demo, but it is in here if you want to set that up. Email, you can get alerts when things are going wrong or things are successful, things like that. LDAP is also optional. If you want to set up LDAP, you can use that for authentication, for logging in to the Openm. You could also use that to sync in all of your Active Directory computers. It's recommended to do that, but not required. All right, and that's the end of the configure the Openm documentation. Let's move on to Updateweb.config. This is the trickiest part of the guide, so we'll try and get through this. So we're done with the web interface for now. I'll just minimize this. And we'll go back to our server. So the first thing we need to do is update the web config file for the Toems UI. So that's just the front end, the web interface. So that's going to be under Program Files, the Openm, Toems UI, web.config. We'll right-click on that, edit with Notepad++, which is installed with the Openm automatically. We'll scroll down to the bottom here, and these are the 3 values you want to look at. The first one is the server name. If you recall, when we were logged in the upper right-hand corner, it was the identifier for the server. If you have more than one application server, you may want to use the Openm-01, -02, etc., or change this to something totally different. That's fine. The second value, the application API URL, you want to leave this one alone. For now, this is how the front end communicates with the API. Since these are both installed in the same box, it's just going to use localhost, and that's not a problem. If you were to split up the front end and the API, you would need to use a real IP address. And the last one here is the upload API URL. This one is a little bit different. Once again, this is going to use the IP address or the fully qualified domain name. Now, what this is for is when you want to upload. There's various things in the Openm that you can upload right through the web interface, such as software. If you want to deploy some software, you can just upload it right in the web interface. This IP address needs to be in there so that that works, essentially. Typically, your front end talks to the API, and that's why localhost works. But when you're uploading files, your client's web browser sort of skips the front end and goes directly to the API. So that's why localhost won't work in that scenario. All right, that's it for this file. I'm going to go ahead and save it. I don't believe we'll need this one anymore, so I'll close it as well. Now we'll go down to the Toems API web config. So this is essentially, the Toems API is really the application. This is where all the logic is. We'll edit the web.config again with Notepad++. We'll scroll to the bottom. And we're going to make a few changes here. First thing we're going to do is allow CAGen. We're going to change that to false. We've already created the certificates. If you remember, that was the last thing we did in the web interface. Now that those are created, we want to change that value to false so that we can't accidentally generate new certificates. If you deploy the Toke client out to all of your endpoints and then someone accidentally creates a new certificate, then they're all going to break and you got a big problem on your hands. So we're going to set that to false so that we can't accidentally do that. We'll do the same thing with allow provision keygen. That was the security key that we created. We're going to also set that to false so no one can accidentally change that. And then while we're in here, we're also going to grab the connection string. This tells the program how to connect to the database. And we're going to need to put that into the comm server. So I've got that on my clipboard. I'm going to save this for now just so I don't lose anything. I'm going to keep that open, and then I'm going to go to the Toke API web config now. I'm going to edit that web.config. All right, we'll scroll to the bottom once again. You'll see a green line here. It says copy the connection string from the application server below this line. So I've got that on my clipboard. I'm just going to paste that in there. Now the Toke API will be able to connect to the database. And let's see here, a few other values we need to update while we're in here. The DB encryption key, you'll find that on the Toems API web.config also. Copy that and move it over to this one, replacing update this value. And finally is the comm server unique ID. Now to get that, we need to go back to the Toems web interface. Open that up. We're going to go to the comm server that we created earlier. We got a timeout there. Client comm servers, and here's the comm server we created earlier. Click View, and you'll see the unique ID here. We'll copy that. We'll go paste that in the comm server unique ID field. Save that as well, and now all three web.configs should be up to date. The next step is to test the Toke API. So up to this point, there's really no way to really test to make sure that the Toke API is working. until you try it and it fails. So we're going to do a quick browser test that will tell us if it's working. IP address in port 8888/provision/verify-db. And if everything is working, you should get 60. And there we go. If something goes wrong, you'll probably just get some generic failure code there. All right, so that means that we've successfully set up the COM servers in the web interface. We've also successfully modified the web.config files properly. Right, moving on with our guide here is install certificates. The last thing we need to do for the installation is to install the certificates that were generated in the web interface onto the server itself. So for this, we're going to go back to the Openm server. We can close this down. Again, you want to do this on the server itself, not a remote machine. You could also do localhost. Works fine as well. This is Internet Explorer 11, so this may not work out too well. All right, I'm going to maximize my screen here. Right now within the mobile mode. So confusing. There we are. All right, we're going to go to admin settings, certificates, actions. Oops, sorry, nope. We're going to click export. We have the certificate authority up here and the intermediate here. So we'll click export in the CA first. I'll save that. And now we'll export the intermediate. I'll save that as well. And there's our two certificates. Now we want to install them onto this server. I believe this was the first one. That should be the CA. Open that up. Yes, Toems CA. We'll install this local machine. It's going to go in trusted root certificate authorities. Next and finish. Now we're going to go to the other certificate. That should be the intermediate. You should see it's trusted now. We've imported the CA. So we'll install this one. Local machine. We're going to place this one in intermediate certificate authorities. Next, finish. And that should do it. That's the first video. It's getting Toems set up. The next video will be on the Toke installation and actually starting to manage some endpoints, deploy some software, collect some inventory. And then the third video will be a whole video on capturing and deploying images. All right, I'll see you then. Thanks.